don't repair or address the needs of our furnaces and heating systems in January. You do that in August. At the same time, you don't take care of the lawnmowers and the equipment, the landscaping equipment in August. You do that in February. So it's a planned approach. That allotment system allowed me to work with the city in certain departments to come up with a 1/12 budget. And that's what we'd really be doing. I don't know what your financial reporting is now, but your financial reporting should be a budget to actual with a variance at a minimum. And that variance should be able to tell you that if you are in June, and, well, your fiscal year is October 1? October 1, right? Okay, so if you're in January and you're already 50% through some of your line items from an expenditure point of view, either they're items that are specifically addressed during the winter months, or you've got a problem, because you're not gonna be able to go through the next 9 months. So, but that's something that we would deal with on a cooperative basis. The other thing too is, Mike, excuse me, the other thing too is the various departments, whomever it is that would be responsible for those departments, whether it be Section 8, if we're overextended there or under, whether it be maintenance, are all gonna have input into that, and I'm not gonna be operating blindly.
Well, we just happen to have we've had an executive director who was very careful with money. Just want to leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you MCPPO certified?
I am not, but that would be one of the first things that I would do, is to get that certification. I teach procurement and contract administration not only for Mass Narrow, but also for the Public Housing Authority Directors Association around the country. It's from a management perspective. That's a nuts and bolts course, and I have not had the necessity to do nuts and bolts. When I was a director, that course wasn't available. But that certainly is something that I would do. Do I anticipate having an issue with that? Not at all, because I know that the manuals that they refer to are the same manuals that I refer to.
Okay. And are you also trained in federal procurement regulations?
Yes. 85.36 used to be called the common rule. Now that's been replaced by 24 CFR 200.1 through, I think, 31. So I teach that. So, but just the fact that I know that, doesn't make me a good executive director.
Sure.
That's what I was saying earlier.
Mike Lewis?
Oh, sorry, Lewis.
Me.
Sorry, Lewis, I apologize.
Have you developed a federal 5-year plans, and also have you completed federal environmental plan documentation?
The answer to that is yes. I participated in it through the Housing Authority in some of them. But again, from an oversight and input point of view, there was an assistant executive director, or is an assistant executive director in Somerville who's responsible for those. I was certainly involved in that, but again, not a hands-on. Am I familiar with that? Certainly. There's no magic there.
What has been your involvement with agency budgeting?
Agency budget?
Yeah, the agency as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that when I was an executive director in time, the fee accountant and I developed the budget cooperatively. Every line, went through every line item. He would provide to me on a monthly basis financial report that was 32 pages long. That was brought down to 3 pages for my board. My board had not previously gotten financial reports, so the first time I gave them, I identified 3 areas of concern. No questions were raised. The next board meeting, they had concerns and questions that they raised about the 3 areas that I had identified. I identified 3 more areas. The next meeting, they questioned me on 3 more. So it was a learning process. Am I familiar with that? Very much so. Very much. It's crucial for the Housing Authority Executive Director to have his or her finger on the finances of the authority. The issue there is, though, that when you look, and Mike just made a comment, and I'm not familiar with that to the extent to be able to comment on it, but I will say this: when you look at the budget, it's not only what it is that you're expending, but what it is you're expending for, and there are times there's a necessity to exceed that. There's a process to be able to go about doing that, and so that, are you married to the budget? No. Is the budget a planning document? Yes. Do plans change? Certainly, certainly. But it changes at the level of primarily the board. or I should say with the authorization of the board.
And, question 6, it's, they got both our names on it, Mike.
I don't care, I'll ask it.
Okay.
What has been your involvement with unions and union negotiations?
I've represented a number of housing authorities where we've had union negotiations. When I was a director, I had my maintenance personnel voted for a union 1 week after I was there. Had nothing to do with me, had everything to do with the fact that they were upset with what had transpired before I got there. I think I worked very cooperatively with the union. They understood that my expectation was that for every hour they got paid, or I should say every hour they worked, they got paid an hour's worth of pay. I took the input of my maintenance personnel in order to assist in drafting the budget, the comprehensive needs for the authority. They had input into that. I had no issue with that, and we worked cooperatively. But the bottom line was that there was a standard that was set, and if the performance wasn't there, the union knew that I was going to come forth with some concerns. Seldom had grievances. We had a very good working relationship. After I left HON, I have represented a number of housing authorities in union negotiations and union contracts, primarily smaller housing authorities. Larger housing authorities oftentimes will have a labor attorney. And as I said, I don't profess to be a labor attorney, even though I do serve in that capacity to some extent, limited extent.
Hey, Wilson, you said,
Oh, it's me, I'm sorry.
It's like rapid
I'm
fire.
sorry.
I'm trying.
I'm trying to, that's,
I don't have
my
the-
mind is
I don't have the- I don't
my
have
hand
the,
will go
uh,
as
the-
fast,
the
but
schedule here.
unfortunately. Describe your knowledge of the Section 8 program. How is it funded? What does it take to administer, and what are the key performance metrics?
Okay. It's funded by HUD. It is a program where individuals pay a percentage of their income for rent. We have a private landlord who executes a housing assistance payments contract. Enters into that with the housing authority. The housing authority gives a voucher to the participant, and the participant enters into a lease with the landlord. My knowledge of the Section 8 program is, I think it's very good. I had a discussion recently with an attorney, a 20-minute conversation with him about the termination of a Section 8 participant. And he looked at me and he said, "Wow, you really know a lot about Section 8. And he said, "For a lawyer." And I said, "Well, that's because I was an executive director, and I've been dealing with this on numerous occasions." I had some discussions today concerning Section 8. I think I'll be honest with you, I love to talk to directors of Section 8 because they talk a Section 8 language. And there are not too many of us who do that. I'm very familiar with the regulations. Jonathan and I represent more housing authorities in the area of Section 8 than we do in public housing, because there's a number of smaller housing authorities in Massachusetts that utilize the state pilot attorney for their public housing, but they have a federal Section 8 program where they need an attorney or attorneys to work in that area, and we do that. And so that I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with what the constraints are with that. I'm familiar with the need for the housing authority to ensure a maximum level of utilization of its vouchers without surpassing what its budget amount is. So that, when I said a few moments ago, I mentioned Section 8 being involved in knowing what the financial status of the housing authority is. It's extraordinarily important for that individual to be cognizant of that at that point in time. I should say at any point in time, because aspect of Section 8, which I think is most important, is not that we have 100 vouchers or 1,000 vouchers. It's how many vouchers do we have under lease? How many vouchers is it that we don't have? Because each one of those vouchers that's available to be used, that's not being used, is a family who could be taking advantage of it. And that's the bottom line. I mean, we're here to provide that level of service. So we have to have a sharp pencil when we deal with that.
Thank you for the answer, for really elaborating the answer for me.
Okay. I'm trying to be succinct, but with the time constraints. The time of the.
well, I got one,
Okay.
Number 8 here, describe your knowledge of public housing programs. What's the difference between federal and state?
Okay.
How are they funded, and what are the key performance metrics?
Okay. We have HUD who's providing you with your federal funding, and I believe it's 93% of the units, is that what I remember? Mike, I think you told me that. I heard you say that at a board meeting. The state provides 7%. The leases are different, but yet they're somewhat similar. They're different enough to just confuse everybody. And I don't know if they do that intentionally or not. But the state is more of a, insofar as the budget, when it comes to public housing, the state is more of a line item review, close oversight, whereas the federal government will provide you with a bottom line review. Federal government will not be as strict in their scrutiny of the authority, even though the authority is required to perform. We found that out back a few years ago, one of the previous administrations. But the bottom line is that both of them have differences, but both of them are there to do the same thing as I just indicated with the Section 8 program, and that is to house people who are in need, whether it be elderly folks who are sleeping on the couch of their daughter or their son, or are homeless, or whether it is a family who is in a difficult situation. We have to be cognizant of that. I don't understand what the turnaround, I don't know what the turnaround time is for the housing authority for the units, but again, the sooner we get folks into a vacant unit, the sooner we collect rent. The more rent that we collect, the more things that we can do from a business point of view. The authority's point of view is that our responsibility is to house folks. We need to house folks as quickly as possible. When I worked at PBD Properties, the turnaround time was, I believe it was 3 days. 3 days. When I went into Taunton, the turnaround time was 200 days. 200 days. Can't run a housing authority with a vacancy turnaround of, an occupancy turnaround of 200 days. We brought that down to a reasonable amount, someplace under 14 days. The state and the Fed say 14 days for elderly, 21 days for family. I don't agree with that. I think it should be less than that. So, what's the main difference between the two? I'll summarize it and say, we understand that the administration is different. Our residents don't understand the difference between state and federal. All they understand is that there's a unit here, why can't I move into it? I'm homeless, I need a unit, and we have to be able to answer that for them, to say that this is the reason why. Maybe somebody else is going in there, maybe you don't qualify. But we have to do that in a manner that's respectful and not in a manner where we are pushing folks away. We want to encourage them to come here. And hopefully, quite frankly, there's a need. And we'll have the ability to extend that and maybe address more.
Quickly, Jeff, if I may, just another point of contention with me. Cash reserve balance, we're sitting on $5,140,000 this month, $5,132,371.51. Just what does that, again, I could never get an answer in the last 4 years, and just what does that money do?
Well, I would hope it grows a lot of interest, to be quite frank with you.
No, that's not-
I know it's got your interest, but that's not the interest that I'm talking about.
Use it, use it, or lose it.
Here's my concern, and that is, there may be $5 million, without knowing specifically what the minimum requirement is for your developments, based on your developments. It would seem to me that there may be a variance between that number and the amount that's there. I think it's important for the housing authority to analyze what its needs are, determine what those needs are, to come forward with a plan on how to address that. The other question I would have with this, Mike, is that how's that grown? Where does it come from? Was it 3 million and now it's 5, or was it 8 and now it's 5? And what was the reason for that? Was it $3 million that was expended for operating expenses? I would hope not. I wouldn't think you'd ever want to take it out of that. I think your operating expenses would be undertaken based upon your ongoing income. But that's another area that there needs to be, in my mind, with me, an understanding as far as where that come from and where we're going with that. And if the need is to just blow $3 million, then I wouldn't be, for the sake of spending $3 million, I wouldn't be in agreement with that. But if there was a necessity to spend money for certain items that the board determines are critical, then I would certainly be in favor of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What has been your involvement with Section 3 planning and documentation?
Yeah, Section 3 planning and documentation. I deal with that in particular mostly at the Somerville Housing Authority and with a couple of our other larger clients who have a need to address that. and increase the level of participation of our residents and resident enterprises. That was short.
Yeah,
You can go longer if you want, but.
Okay, I've got the next one on deck. Okay, if I were to speak to your staff, how would they characterize your management style? And I know all I have to do to get that answer is call Jonathan and see if you ever sent him the.
Well, you know what, I think that you could still call down to the Taunton Housing Authority and speak to the staff there, who the majority of them are still there. Or I shouldn't say majority, a good number of them are still there. My management style is, I think I'm fair. I think that my staff has always felt, even Jonathan, have always felt that they could come to me with a question and I'd attempt to address it. But management style is to provide areas of responsibility and hopefully develop areas of expertise. If there's an issue with Section 8, then the director of Section 8 is who we go to. If the issue is with finance, then the person who is the director of finance is who we go to. The assistant director has to know everything, so that there's a concern there. But you give people the training and you give them the responsibility, and then you, on an ongoing basis, evaluate the success with that. And there's sometimes folks are weaker in other areas than where their strengths are, and they may not want to go into that. And we have to gradually get folks to go into that, either by becoming more comfortable, facilitating that, providing them training, or providing with assistance to be able to do the job. But it's incumbent upon the authority, again, to develop that area of expertise. And then that will filter down to the other staff members. Not only the management level, but the staff members themselves have to feel comfortable in what it is that they do. I had a staff member one time who said to me, she said, I'm not able to get my job done, and I work an extra hour every day, so I just want you to know that. And I said, well, I have a problem with that, because your responsibility is to work between 8 and 4, and you need to be able to complete your tasks between 8 and 4. So it's necessary for us to see what it is you're doing and how it is that you're doing it, so that you don't need to spend that extra hour. It's all well and good, but if you can't get your job done between 8 and 4, then you're not doing the job as identified. We were able to identify things that individual wasn't able to do in a timely manner, and corrected that so that we got the work that we needed. And that's what I would do. I have closed offices. I had a problem with my staff at one point in time in time. They were getting distracted, and they had a number of tasks that they weren't fulfilling, and it was all because of walk-ins and telephone calls. And so I closed the office to walk-ins and telephone calls for a short time. And at 3 o'clock, they were to either have scheduled the people to come in for the walk-in for appointments, or they were to answer their telephone calls. That was many years ago. We weren't using the internet as much, so I'm sorry, I'm showing my age, but there are mechanisms available to be able to address that. But the goal is for the staff to be able to provide a level of service to the community, in particular our residents and our participants. As I said earlier, we want to address the concerns as far as productivity. Can't emphasize that enough. Facilities are another thing. They have to have the tools to be able to do the job.
Thank you. I've got another question and I have to ask you, so I'll ask you all of it at the same time, in the essence of time. How do you evaluate performance, which you may have answered, and then describe your most gratifying work related to accomplishment?
Well, the first is fairly easy. You try to do that. You evaluate folks on an objective basis, not subjectively, and you evaluate them as best you can quantifiably. I said earlier that I like to think that the best way to do that in the public sector, and in some cases the private sector, but in particular the public sector, is through management by objectives. And again, that's something that I was taught when I was in grad school at Suffolk. Throw that second question by me again, so you give me more time to think about it.
Describe your most gratifying work related to accomplishment.
My most gratifying work.
Work related accomplishment.
Sure. I was sitting right here one day, and this may not help you decide to hire me for this position, but I was sitting right here one day, and one of your managers was sitting where Barbara Vivian is. And the manager turned to me and said, you know, she said, when your son speaks, we hear your voice come out. That's the most gratifying accomplishment I have, is the fact that my son is able to carry on what I do. Never anticipated that. We never discussed him becoming a lawyer until he said to me one day, Dad, I want to be a lawyer. This is where I want to go to school. And I said, that's great, Jonathan. He said, yeah, I want to get my master's in philosophy and I want to get my Juris Doctorate degree at the same time. I said, that's terrific. I said, when's the application date for that school? He said, tomorrow. Needless to say, that didn't pan out. But that's my greatest accomplishment, is the fact that my son is able to carry on in this industry. He carries on what I think that I started. Just as a side note, I mentioned this to the selection committee. Both my sets of grandparents were public housing residents. They both received, my paternal grandmother was a Section 8 participant, and my maternal grandparents moved out of my house, my overcrowded house, when I was 6 or 7 years old, and moved into public housing. I still have a picture of them moving into their housing authority apartment and the chairperson handing them keys. Did I have other residents who lived in other relatives who were residents of public housing? Sure, I can appreciate it. And I can understand the sense of safety and security. So that, coupled with Jonathan and seeing him in another generation, I've got 2 generations in front of me, myself, my son, all participating in this. I think it's carrying on a nice line of involvement. Yeah, to me, that's a pretty good accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is Mike Lewis.
Describe a work-related situation that did not go well. Why did it not go well? How you handled it and what you learned from it.
Oh, man, you know, Mike, they teach in law school that you never think about, you never admit to things. You know that. That's a tough question.
That's a lawyer thing.
Yeah, that's a lawyer thing.
That's a lawyer thing.
I'm trying to think. Is anything that
I hate to
didn't
be
go
asked that question. I've pretty much lived a life of total perfection, so.
Yeah, I usually ask the question, tell me your weaknesses, not your strengths, and so, I'm trying to think as far as, yeah, you know what? I think I can probably tell you one of the things I've learned over the years, and I deal with this in my trainings. As an executive director, when I was in Barnstable, I was there on an interim basis because of the executive director leaving, was there for an extended time. And I had very good cooperation with my board. When I went into Taunton, I had a situation where there were a number of investigations that were going on. I had a situation where the board was divided. It was a 4-1 division. I came on board and I tried to work with all 5 members of the board. I was unable to do that. I had one board member who it seemed like every step of the way was trying to undercut what the board did, undercut what I did. Loser, I know you've been in my trainings, Georgiana, you've been in, Bill, you've been in. Some of those case studies were specific to those types of a situation. I always think, though, that there's positive to come from negative, and so that I'm thankful to have gone through that and trying to not convert, but convince that individual that the way the Housing Authority was proceeding forward was positive. His concerns, while they were valid, weren't shared by the other board members, so that made it difficult. But it was never to a point where the board ever felt that he was a hindrance and there would be removal of him by pursuant to statute. But I would probably say that's the one thing that if I could do differently, if I could have impacted, I couldn't think of anything I could do differently, but if I could have impacted that, then I would have had what I thought was a extraordinarily positive board. Notwithstanding that, though, Michael, when we came out of the board meetings, the Housing Authority was going in one direction with we had this one, like I said, this one person who was over someplace on the side that tried to trip us up. And it made me, it made my assistant, who's now the executive director there, and it made others that much stronger because we were cognizant of what was out there, and so we didn't take things for granted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess I get to ask the last question. Actually, I have two of them, and I'll try to consolidate two of them into one. I guess this is the time.
I'll try to give you one
I'm the
answer.
guy who poured the water, we could not wrap the plastic wrapper off the cup, so I take full responsibility for that. In closing, we hit you with a lot of questions in a very limited time frame. It's only fair, before we close, to ask you if you have any questions for us, and we also would like to invite you to make a closing statement.
Okay. Well, I do have a question. And that is, and any one of you can answer this, it can be short, it can be long, it matters not. What's the direction of the board? I don't deal with the board, I deal with legal issues here. I would be very interested to see what or where the board pictures itself to be in 6 months or a year from now. And what is it that is of biggest concern to the board? Maybe that's two questions. What is it is of biggest concern to the board members at this point in time?
Well, I'd like to take a shot at answering that and invite anybody else to jump right in. Naturally, we want the board to have plenty of money and pay their bills and have everything painted and lawn mowed and everything, but my problem is, I want a director that's there for people, there's a people person. The contract's 2.5 years from being settled. People asking for a lock in the gate and they're not getting it. And we shouldn't be even talking about it, but if the tenants aren't getting something, they're gonna come to the board. Who else are they gonna go to? They're not gonna go to church and pray for or something, they're gonna ask us. And we want somebody who's a people person. Sometimes, I'm not saying the people are always right, or the employees are always right, but they all should be treated with respect. And I think we can use a lot more of it around here. And that's one of the main things I'm looking for in an executive director. Now, naturally, you still have to make money.
But is that the direction of the board? Is that, I mean, I understand that's a responsibility, I understand that. What I'm trying to inquire about is, for me, that's a granted. That's something that should be done. What I'm concerned with is that, and if there's not, I mean, I'm not aware the board has done any planning, strategic planning or anything. Is there a groundswell of support if the board began to do strategic planning and had someone come in here to facilitate that and discuss where the board wants to be in 6 months, a year, or 5 years? Is that is there a necessity for additional housing in Medford? Is that not the case? I know the Housing Authority at one point in time had some property that it owned. I know at one point in time the Housing Authority had a nonprofit. I would like to see if there's any inclination on the board as far as going forth with any one or a couple of those things, or if not, if there's any inclination for any type of planning to identify exactly what it is you want to do, as opposed to functioning with what I call the micro, the day-to-day. And the day-to-day is going to help Mrs. Smith get a refrigerator fixed, but is there anything beyond the day-to-day?
As for me, I guess, I'm not gonna speak for the board, I'll speak for me as a board member. I would love to, I think right now we're just treading water and we deal with the day-to-day, and I think that's what Bill's kind of expressing, is we're dealing with the day-to-day. I think we wanna get beyond, we wanna look at a 1-year plan, 5-year plan. For me, I'd love to look at being a moving to work agency or something like that, something progressive where we can be, similar to what you said, we can be proactive instead of reactive. What I think we are now is reactive. I think strides have been made, because of the hole we're in, but I think we need to make bigger strides so that we are pushing forward. And it doesn't have to be moving to work, I'm just using that as an example of something that I would love the Housing Authority to strive for. And I think it's good for the residents, I think it's good for the employees, and I think it's good for the community.
And I would like to add that, as for me as well, on the board and also is a tenant, what I'm looking for the board right now to see where we'll be moving forward to is to have someone, to come in, executive director, to kind of deal with, the tenants, so they don't have to, really feel the need to come to the board with small-minded things. To have someone to take the responsibility to answer questions, to provide them with, with direct answer with what they want, instead of coming to us. Because we should be the last resort, that they come onto the board, on board meeting, for them to complain that they haven't received, like you mentioned, Bill mentioned, a lock on the door, or something else, that I would love to see us move past that we should be the last resort when the tenant is not, and we're looking for, I would love to have someone that will take that part and move forward with that.
When I was a director in Taunton, I used to call it the Alan Pelletier rule. I was there 8 years, and I think Alan was my chair for maybe 6 years. And people would come forward and talk about a lock, or talk about a refrigerator, or whatever. Alan would put his hand up, and that's why I call it the Alan Pelletier rule. He would say, have you approached administration on that? And without exception, it was always, no, we haven't. And Alan would say, well, we're gonna refer this to administration. Board wouldn't even hear it. We're gonna refer it to administration. My responsibility at that point in time was to ensure that that individual got an answer. Either the issue was addressed, or they got an answer that maybe they didn't agree with, but they got an answer. Not once in 8 years, 6 years, not once in the 6 years that Alan was the chair did that ever come back to the board. Because the micro, the minutia is not something that needs to be brought before the board, even though the fact that Mrs. Smith can't keep ice cream in her refrigerator because the refrigerator doesn't work or the gasket is broken is extraordinarily important to her, and we have to be cognizant of that.
And I think to look at kind of now and in the future, part of what Mike was alluding to is we've come out of a hole.
Right.
And I think the reality is right now, there's still needing a bit more climbing out, not 100% out. I think the staff also needs some continuity and some stabilization, and I think that will trickle into all the other initiatives with the strategic plan. I think the authority definitely could benefit from that, and we've talked in kind of smaller ways when we tried to do the tenant evaluations and when we tried to do other evaluations to try and gather more data and be more data driven. I just don't think we're in that place yet because the authority hasn't yet stabilized and performing on all cylinders, for lack of a better analogy. So I think we need someone who can come in to do that, and then to approach this conversation of let's do some future planning because we're no longer reactive. We have enough staff, we have people trained, all we're staffed 100% of capacity, which is a concern at the present time that we're not. To then be able to approach some more of the strategic thinking and allow people to think about productivity and many of the things that come along with a 6-month or 1-year plan that we haven't really had the benefit of time to pay attention to.
Well, I wanna put my 2 cents in here. So do you have an hour? Security is a big thing, and myself and Bill anyways, I know at one time we did give them security, and then the former director cut back and he did away with it. I think it's very important, especially today. We had it years ago, we did away with it, and we need it back, okay? That's a big issue. You talk about down at the pre-village, the building that we had, it sat there for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. We did have an assistant director who came in here and took care of that, knocked that down. That's been empty now for about a year or so. Something should be put up there. Again, and I keep saying, the former director dragged his feet. He and I never hit it off. I admit it, and my board members know that. But I am very tenant oriented, okay? And they're not always right. But they're a lot more right than the past director was. And I'm venting it, and it's too bad, but that's the way it is. And I want what's best for the city of Medford, for the Medford Housing Authority. I've said it before, I lived in the city all my life, as Bill, William, and I want the best. And we haven't got the best in the last 4 years, okay? And the 4 before that, unfortunately, we know what happened. But I want the best, what's best for the Medford Housing Authority, for the seniors, for the family developments. And I think you raised back when you were talking about how staff gets interrupted. And I've been in here a number of times, and that front, I don't know how those the women out there handle it. And maybe there should be some type of setup so that a certain time of day applicants can come in and not disturb the other part of the office. And I've seen 3 or 4 women out there trying to help one another. As far as staff, we got plenty of staff.